Morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear us.
Good morning, Ollie.
Good morning. Just waiting for people. We've got some people still filing into our virtual auditorium this morning. Good to see some familiar names there. Welcome, one and all. Morning to Spencer Lewis. Morning to Leroy Thomas. Good to see you. Morning, Neil Cotter.
As often, we're noticing that the delegates are arriving fairly close to the 11 o'clock. So for everyone's purposes, we're just waiting for the delegate numbers to increase a little bit, but we'll be ready to go in about 30-40 seconds, I would hope.
Everyone just grabbing their popcorn and their ice cream, getting themselves comfortable. Ready for the show.
I think we're ready when you are, Nick, as long as you're not.
Yep.
Fantastic.
No, I suggest we start. Morning, everybody. I'm Nick Butler, Commercial Director at Drive Tech. You can't actually see me because apparently I've got a face for radio, but I would like to welcome you to today's webinar in support of Project Edward. As many of you will be aware, Drive Tech for almost 20 years now have worked with corporate businesses, our police partners, and more latterly we've supported the Roads Victims Trust charity. So we're really acutely aware of the devastating impact on lives that collisions causing serious injuries or worse fatalities can have. And I'm sure you all agree that we should do everything we can to work together with that aim that every day without a road death becomes a reality. And Drive Tech are really proud to be supporting this initiative. As the saying goes, prevention is better than cure. So the education of drivers and those responsible for their well-being is at the heart of this year's Project Edward theme of driving for work. So once again, thanks for joining us. And without further delay, I'll hand you over to your host for the session, Oliver Stevenson.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear me and see me clearly. I've got a giraffe peering over my shoulder at the moment. I hope that isn't too distracting. It gives me immense pleasure to be hosting this Drive Tech webinar today. I am Ollie Stevenson, Head of Commercial Development at Drive Tech. And this webinar is focused on improving driver behaviour in support of Project Edward Week. I guess just a few words before I go on Project Edward. It started back in 2016 as European Day Without a Road Death and has now evolved this year into Every Day Without a Road Death, focusing on those who drive for work. The campaign is delivered in association with police forces across the UK, as well as Highways England through their Driving for Better Business campaign, together with the Association of Road Risk Management and the charity Tyre Safe. So we're really proud to be involved in this. Hopefully you're going to get a lot out of our session today. So just in terms of the format, we've got 1 hour. We'll be finishing no later than midday. Hopefully we'll fill the time up with lots of questions and healthy debate. And there will be an opportunity for us to take questions from our audience. I'm joined by a hugely experienced and esteemed panel. Today I'm going to introduce them to you in just a minute. Feel free to give everybody a wave though, Stuart, Emma and David if you want to. All looking very, there you go. No need to be coy, we're all friends here. So yeah, as I say, it's going to be a 1 hour agenda. Once I've introduced the panel, we're going to lead into our presentation today from Dave Wales. That presentation focuses specifically on the way stress affects driver behaviour. And then we're going to move into a panel discussion involving Stuart, Emma and David, not just around stress, but around driving behaviour and perhaps even, you know, associated topics as well, to do with driver training and risk management. So don't be shy, we've got a wealth of experience here. Feel free to ask any questions that you want to know the answers to, or that you feel might be relevant, or that you feel other delegates may get the benefit of. So I'm going to introduce our panel to you now, if that's okay. So firstly, really pleased to be joined by Stuart Lightbody. He probably doesn't need too much of an introduction. Stuart's currently Fleet and Green Transport Strategy Director for Chapter Street, but he's a well-known face in the industry, having spent 25 years in Fleet and Transport, previously Fleet Director at Morrison's Group and Anglian Water, where most recently he was crowned Fleet News Fleet Manager of the Year in 2019. Very prestigious award and thoroughly deserved by Stuart. Not only that, Stuart is also Deputy Chair of the newly formed AFP, Association of Fleet Professionals, and he also chairs the AFP's LCV committee. So it is, we're immensely honoured to have Stuart joining us on the panel today. Welcome. We also have our very own Emma Loveday. Emma has been at DriveTech since the end of last year, but has a huge amount of experience in fleet and fleet risk management. Emma spent 3 years previously at Thames Water, where she was responsible for the safety of 3,000 drivers, and she very proudly drove a reduction, a 20% reduction in incidents at Thames Water. And before that, she was at a little known fleet called Mighty for 5 years, one of the biggest fleets in the country, where she cut her teeth in the industry. And last but not least, our very own commercial vehicle product manager, Dave Wales. Welcome, Dave. And Dave's going to be leading our presentation in just a moment. Dave's an advanced driving instructor with over 20 years experience in the road transport industry. And as a fleet risk management consultant, he's worked with some of the largest corporate and public sector fleets in the UK. So I'm going to hand over to Dave in just a second. Just a little word of housekeeping for everybody watching us today. You should be able to see a question box. Spencer Lewis has already found it and fired the first question, or in fact, it's not a question, he's just used it to say good morning to us all. So thank you very much for that. There's also a chat box. I would ask you to use the question box for asking questions, please. Keep those coming in throughout the presentation and then throughout the discussion afterwards. And I'll be picking out as many of those questions as I can to get some really lively and insightful debate and discussion going on our panel. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dave Wales to take us through our presentation around driving stress today. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Ollie, and welcome everybody. As a driver behaviour, stress is rarely discussed, but when we drive, we can spot some really bad behaviours in other drivers. We can see them speeding, jumping traffic lights on their mobile phones, but it's notoriously difficult to actually observe stress in a driver. But professional drivers are at high risk of being involved in a road traffic incident due to their high mileage. And professional drivers also have work-related issues to deal with. A stressed out driver will find it hard to concentrate and make safe driving decisions. We know driving is stressful. even if we don't appreciate it. The moment we start to drive, we become involved in a series of events that take a toll on our stress levels. Sitting in traffic jams in particular, being cut up, following too closely by that vehicle behind. You look in your mirror and go, oh no, how close do they want to get? All take a toll on our stress levels. But if you add another layer for the commercial driver, for some, it's just the sheer size of their vehicle, large vehicle, small roads, but also you add into the mix the working time directive. You add into the mix the tachograph rules and regulations, and just-in-time deliveries. You can see very quickly that a stressed out driver is a commercial driver. So behind every steering wheel lurks the potential stressed out driver. Which one is you? Let's see if we can dive into your psyche now. So think you're driving along, someone cuts you up while you're driving. What is your first thing to do? What would you do? Would you, one, take a deep breath and drive on? Or would you, two, sound your horn, then drive on? Or would you go for the nuclear option, number three, repeatedly sound your horn, yell out and pound your fist against the steering wheel, wonder how the other person got their license in the first place? Now, we can probably all laugh at number three, but I can almost guarantee each one of you has come to that number three. Almost guaranteed. Now, what I'd like you to do now is just think of a time where you've been involved in a really serious incident that gives you a little bit of stress. How did it make you feel? Does it feel uncomfortable even to think about it, even now, after a long period of time? If it does, then you've probably been involved in quite a stressful incident. Talking of stressful incidents, who remembers their driving test all them years ago for me? Now, the driving test, well, you know, sitting in that waiting room, waiting for that examiner to come out, absolutely really scared, let's put it that way. But the driving test is all about the mechanics of driving. It didn't really cater for any sort of stressful events. It's all about the mechanics of driving and the rules of the road. So we're not really geared up as individual drivers to actually accommodate any sort of stress in our driving. But we really should start to recognise that stress is a major contributory in our accidents. But the thing is, we treat driving as just a normal extension of our daily activity. But it's far from that. The subtle norms that we would normally find, we sort of dismiss when we're driving. So when we're waiting at a supermarket checkout with our trolley, we don't find other shoppers pushing in front of us. But when we're out on the road, you normally find somebody's going to push in front of you. So the subtle norms have gone, because we're all cocooned in our little vehicles with our own little thoughts and our own little processes to go through. But the unfortunate thing is, as we probably know on this call, driving is error prone. And it's also associated with a lack of emotional control. Now, I call this the pressure cooker driving. Now, there's more vehicles on the road than ever before, and our road space is becoming shrinking as we speak. Even driving on motorways feels like a conveyor belt at times. But there's more population. The population has increased. So that means more goods, more services, and also more goods and services being delivered. But also we have more vehicles on the road, more licensed vehicles than ever before. And it's not too uncommon to have 2, maybe even 3 or 4 vehicles in a household. And when we do get in our vehicles, we have a tendency to travel longer miles, further distances. And I hate to say this, but they reckon by 2040, almost a quarter of all travelling time could be spent in traffic, 70 hours per year for each driver. So you place yourself in the arms of a commercial driver, then yeah, it's not looking good, is it? But also we have a mechanism in our bodies that I'm sure that quite a few of us know on this call, called the flight or fight mechanism. Now, many, many years ago, when we was cavemen and we was chased by wild animals, our brain would naturally slow down to accommodate danger. And that's why you hear the old saying, well, it happened in slow motion. So when confronted with a wild animal, we'd have a few choices to make. The first choice would be to fight the wild animal. The second choice would be to stay where you are and get eaten. And the third, and probably my choice, would be to run away. And we still have that mechanism in our bodies as we speak today. Now, clearly, we don't get chased by wild animals anymore. So the only time this fight or flight mechanism really kicks in is, unfortunately, when we're involved in a serious incident. But too much of a build-up, we can't fight and we can't run away. So the tension builds up with no obvious outlet. So drivers become extremely stressed out, especially the commercial drivers that are exposed to this sort of incident on a daily basis. Now, I like this. There's a good old saying in every life, a little rain must fall. And do you know what? We have to have a little bit of stress in our lives. There's no two ways about it. In fact, stress potentially is a good thing. Let me put it into the concept of you're pulling away at a junction. You haven't got a clear view in either direction. Now, stress tells us we should be looking and taking our time to pull out from that junction. Now, if we didn't have any stress in our lives, we would naturally just pull out without a care in the world. So stress is a good thing. But also, we can find ourselves being overwhelmed by stress. And drivers don't even realize that they are becoming stressed out. So they may show signs of being ill-tempered. They may show signs of finding it hard to concentrate. They may have signs of sleep deprivation. And even minor problems become a little bit of an issue and lower self-esteem. So too much stress in people's lives bring us in that direction. So why should we care about stress? Now, I'm sure quite a few on this call would say, well, do you know what? Why should we even bother about stress? If you're a professional driver, surely that's a part of your job. Now, you'll get paid for driving, so you should really be paid for the stress level you encounter. Now, probably 20 years ago, I would probably agree with you. But I did some driver training a few years ago to a company. I got inside this cab of a driver, and I just noticed a driver with his head in his hands and tears flooding out from his eyes. Now, obviously, me being the really caring person that I am, said, "You're okay, mate." And he went on to say that he just lost his wife the week before, and it was his first day back into the job. Now, clearly, that driver was in no fit state to actually carry on driving that vehicle. And when I spoke to his transport manager, he had no idea of what the driver was going through, but was quite clearly willing for him to go out and do some deliveries that day. So why should we care about stress? Well, it causes physical and mental harm. And that's not to say we're even talking about the stress that we bring into our work life. If you have an argument with a loved one, you have that final reminder come through the letterbox, or you're dealing with somebody who's ill in your family, it can seriously affect your quality of life and ultimately the way you drive. So it can cause a great deal of distress for you and the people around you. But also, it can affect your ability to work. And that's a big one for me. And you'll probably find you'll have stressed out drivers going off sick. But for me, your drivers are your biggest asset you have. Now, you probably know this already. So take stress seriously as an issue. Are your senior management team aware of how stressful driving can be? And what plans have they got in place to actually alleviate stress in your workplace? Companies, they spend thousands of pounds going through analysing how much fuel drivers use, the maintenance of the vehicles. But really, it's the capabilities of the driver behind the wheel we should be really focusing on. Create a culture. So toolbox talks. We're looking at policies and procedures to address the stress. So do you have annual meetings? Do you look at driver notice boards and put information up, all to make a culture of talking about stress for drivers? Start to listen and understand. Now, listening to drivers is very important because they are the solution. Now, most drivers know when they're getting stressed out, but they won't tell anybody because it's quite a macho thing to keep it under your belt. But we really should start to listen and understand drivers. When choosing our driver CPC syllabus, do we look for stress in some of them titles? Do we address that? Remember, preventing a crash is good for your business. There's a good old saying in the transport world, if the wheels are not turning, the company's not earning. So preventing a crash is good for your business. Now at DriveTech, we're forever looking at new ways of delivering improvements to drivers, especially around safety. So we've come up with a new concept called Driver's Mate. Now, Driver's Mate is very short, sharp, little videos at the start of a driver's day. But first of all, we appreciate that drivers are busy people with busy schedules. So they still need little nudges now and again, just to tell them about their moral and legal obligations as a driver. There's going to be little bite-sized messages we give to drivers, and we're going to show a couple in a couple of seconds' time. Now, these safety messages are very short and sweet, no more than 2 minutes in duration, and they're all down to earth, talking about practical things. Now, we'll mainly be focused on 3 major elements, which is cost savings, driver behaviour, and the compliance of the driver. The subject matter can run and run. We're going to come up with at least 365 of these content videos to share with your drivers, and it can affect behavioural change. Before I play the Driver's Mate sneaky preview, yet again, it's still in development at this stage. If I can ask everyone to just turn up their sound a little bit to get the full volume, that would be appreciated. And I'm going to play you 2 of the Driver's Mates.
For me, this is one of the fundamental duties of a professional driver. The driver is always legally responsible for the condition of the vehicle while in use. Therefore, conducting their daily walk-around check is a vital part of a driver's role. Now, who can argue with that? Now, we've all come across drivers that spin you a line saying why they don't bother doing a vehicle check. Such lines as, it's a new vehicle, it don't need checking. Or, I haven't got time for all this, I'm really busy. And the classic, I checked it yesterday, it was all right then. Comments like that, for me, separates the difference between a driver and a professional driver. You know, professional drivers recognise the importance of a vehicle check and take their responsibilities seriously. Professional drivers, they also know the penalties and consequences of poorly maintained vehicle out on the road, not only for themselves, but for all road users. Do you know what? At worst, you may cause serious injury or even fatalities. So before you take your vehicle out on the road, be a professional driver, not just a driver. So why bother with the vehicle check? I think we know the answer to that one, don't we?
I think some of you experienced a little bit of video lag there. I'm going to play the next one, but if it doesn't come clear, it will be posted up on a website address, and we'll give the details after this. Let's play this one, last one.
I bet you've come across a few drivers in the past They give you the line about not wearing a seatbelt for whatever reason. Let's dispel some of their myths. Come on.
It takes too much time to fasten your seatbelt 20 times a day.
Getting out your vehicle 20 times a day, get your point. I'd like you to think about this. It only takes about 3 seconds to put a belt on. You times that by 20, that's a minute. I think your life is worth a minute, don't you?
Seatbelts cause more injuries than they prevent.
Yeah, it's true that seatbelts might cause superficial injuries such as bruises or abrasions in a high-speed impact. But I'll tell you what's the alternative? Going through the windscreen?
Seatbelts trap you in your vehicle during a crash.
This myth is often associated with fire and water-related accidents, which is extremely rare. But more importantly, seatbelts can actually prevent you from being knocked unconscious, which increases your chances of escaping during an accident. Yeah, just to prove a point, have a look at this video. Which out of the two would you rather be? The one with the seatbelt or the one without? I don't know which one I'll choose. See you next time.
Right, for me, that's a bit of a shame because we really wanted to show off our driver's mate concept to you because we feel that DriveTech has massive potential to really improve driver behaviour. But yet again, never mind, technology has got the best of us, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So what I'm going to do now, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hand you back to the team for any other questions.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks very much. Really interesting. I think it raises so many questions. You mentioned our fight or flight mechanism, and whilst I don't find myself being chased by too many wild animals when I'm out running in the woods, there are plenty of road hogs out on the road and other crazy people. So and it, you know, why do people behave the way they do out on the roads today? I mean, there are lots of factors. Some of them you've mentioned. So one question, I think I'll start with Stuart here, if that's okay, Stuart. So thinking about a typical fleet manager or risk manager's responsibilities when it comes to, you know, prioritizing which risks or obligations to deal with first, it strikes me that perhaps dealing with driver behavior, unwanted or negative driver behaviors, won't always be top of the list. You know, it won't come above maintaining your vehicles, meeting your regulatory responsibilities, you know, managing other suppliers and stuff, managing the supply chain. What's your view on it, on managing driver behavior and the best ways to do that, and what sort of impact that's had on your business in the past?
I think it's a fair question, and it is always a challenge. So when it comes to the assets, some of the issues you find, you know, walk around check, you can see something that's obviously incorrect, and it's something tangible, and you put your finger on. We're trying to understand how a driver is feeling, or why a driver is driving like they are, is much more difficult because it can be subjective. Is, you know, what I consider to be good driving is, you know, may not be the same as somebody else's. So actually, what gives me the right as a fleet manager to declare that what I believe is right and how they're driving is wrong? So having some measures, whether it be from telematics or from other means, that actually, you know, evidence-based examples of where it would fall, you know, really below a standard that I suppose anybody would deem to be acceptable, but then to have a grown-up conversation with them as to try and understand why, because most people are rational human beings most of the time, but as David pointed out, you get behind the wheel, add some external influence from somebody else's behaviour, and then all of a sudden everything goes out the window. So it's, you know, managing that risk is important. It is challenging. But ultimately, you know, the best outcome anybody can have is the accident that never happened.
Yeah, that leads actually very nicely into a question that we've had from the floor. Keep your questions coming in, everybody, obviously based on what you've seen today and any thoughts that you've got about this. So feel free to fire anything and everything at our panel here. They're prepared to deal with it. That leads really nicely into a question that we've had from Lucy Hughes. Thank you, Lucy. And she's asking about how do you go about getting leadership commitment? So she's referenced specifically a business with a bit of a roadhog sales team who are all sort of, full of sort of bravado and testosterone or whatever perhaps, and that in some ways sort of carries through to their behaviour on the road. They're focused on getting results, hitting targets. They're probably not so worried about their safe driving behaviours. So what are your thoughts on that, Emma? How do you get drivers on board through your leadership team?
Of course, definitely. I think it's one of the hardest things is actually getting that engagement from drivers sometimes. And one thing that I find really help when I was working at Thames and at Mighty was there was a really good relationship between the fleet team and the people managing the risk of the drivers and the health and safety team. I find actually with health and safety backing and almost with a health and safety kind of stamp on any initiatives that we did within the fleet team on driver risk and training, it actually went a lot further and had a lot more weight behind it. I think it's crucial that in order to get drivers to buy in, you really need to focus on the middle management. So for a lot of organisations, for the drivers, if their middle management, if their direct line manager isn't engaged in road safety and isn't engaged in driver risk, you tend to find that whole team won't be. And you'll have pockets potentially where actually you've got teams whose driving statistics and collisions are very good, and that's because that line manager is engaged in it. Yes, you should have buy-in at the board level. Get on board with health and safety as well. Get them invested and get them behind you, but make sure you're not missing out those middle managers. Because for a lot of teams, if their line manager isn't engaged in it, then their team won't be. I think that's really crucial.
Okay. So another question we've had in here, which links to that, is about incentivizing good behavior, which is, it's probably a sensitive subject for some businesses. I mean, incentivizing any behavior, I think increasingly in businesses is becoming more delicate. When it comes to driving behavior, can financial or other incentives potentially work, and what do they look like? What are your thoughts, Stuart, on that?
Yeah, so been there, done that, tried that, and I think picking up on Emma's point, it's trying to find something that's relevant to the individual. So some people are motivated by money. We've seen examples in businesses I've been at where a financial incentive may lead to a change in driver behaviour, but actually is once they've got that that voucher or the 250 quid or whatever it was, they just revert back to normal. And actually there's a real danger of alienating some of the other drivers who may have improved significantly but didn't make the top 1, top 10, whatever it was. So how you divvy up the prize is important, but sometimes that prize doesn't have to be cash, because some drivers from the emotional value or the personal pride of being the top of the league and driving safely gives them that kind of warm feeling inside, and that for some people is enough. It doesn't have to be financially motivated.
Yeah, not everybody's coin operated. Some people genuinely just want to, they maybe it's the status or just recognition that can drive the right behaviour. Have you employed sort of similar things in your previous roles, Emma? Have you found that?
For me, I think, like Stuart said, financial incentives might motivate some people, but I tend to take the view that actually that's quite a superficial way to change driver behaviour. And I'd much rather change it, not because there's a voucher at the end of it, but because people are aware of the reasons why they're changing their behaviour and the risks to them if they don't, which is why I think actually education and communication is a lot more valuable to bring in drivers on board with you on that journey than potentially offering a financial incentive. Financial incentives might give you some quick wins, it's quite easy, low hanging fruit, etc. But is it sustainable? I don't think it is, and I think it is quite superficial. And like I said, I'd much rather bring drivers along because they're educated and they're engaged with safety, rather than, like I said, a voucher at the end of the month because they've driven well. But that's my opinion. Whatever works for whatever organisation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess culture, it depends on the culture, and every business, has a slightly different culture, and it's
and culture is really, really hard to change. It's really difficult, and it's a really long journey. So, don't if you haven't got a great culture in your organisation at the moment for driver safety and training, etc., it's going to be a long journey. But it's definitely something that you should be embarking on and should be changing. And like I said, financial incentives might do a quick win, but long term, it won't pay dividends for you.
Gary,
just go back to that. Sorry, Ollie, go back to that first question relating to that sales force. Maybe an interesting comparison to be done is cost of sales per accident cost. So actually, it's how much revenue do they generate, but how much do they truly cost you, and just do it as a ratio and see how great they are.
Yes, yeah, it's a very good point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gary Rigby's made a good comment again when it comes to sort of leadership and embedding culture from the top down. He says you need to get the CEO involved from day one. Absolutely right, Gary. I'm guessing there'd be no objections to that from anyone on the panel here, right from the very top.
Definitely not. And I think, yeah, well, I was going to say, you'll tend to find in large organizations, you have got that, that stamp of approval from the CEO. It's the right thing to do, to have a risk management program, to have a driver training program, to be, looking to reduce your collisions. But you can find that there is a disconnect between what the board is saying, what the strategy is, and actually what is happening on the ground. And you can't miss out those things. Yes, you can have that great, fantastic banner that you're trying to improve road risk. You've got this great training program, but is it actually happening on the ground? And have you got buy-in throughout the organisation for that? Because it won't work unless you've got buy-in at all levels and people know what they're doing and why they're doing it.
And if they're not leading by example, actually then reinforces that negative behaviour and everybody just follows on behind.
Yes, of course.
Definitely, yeah.
In fact, maybe, some would say in some businesses, the CEO is the worst example of good driver behaviour. They tend to have the fastest cars, don't they? They tend to have the big fast car with a V8 or something in it. And, actually, they're probably not the best example. Lucy says, thank you guys for your response to her question. Excellent input. So I've had a question from Simon Gardner, and this is your territory, I think, Dave. Just bringing you in here. So Simon says bus drivers legally have to conduct first user checks. Yeah. Why can't all fleet users do the same?
A different standpoint in the way bus drivers check. If they're taking a vehicle in service, that's slightly different from a normal daily check they would do.
Elaborate. Elaborate for us, Dave. What's the first user check?
Well, the first user check is all about making sure that the vehicle is in good working order.
Okay.
For me, going back to all the points that everyone's talked about, it's all about the driver's thinking. I think what we tend to do is we tend to ignore drivers and we don't treat them like professionals. So for me, it's all about the way the driver perceives themselves as well. So, I mean, when I was a transport manager many years ago, none of my drivers went out without that first inspection. They felt it was a pride for them to actually go out and do a really good vehicle check, because they was deemed as professionals.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what it's all about. Actually breaking down that barrier and saying to drivers, you're not just a driver, you are a professional driver. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, it is, because I suppose because in some roles, if we think about bus, coach, lorry, transport, logistics, that kind of thing, they are a professional driver. They're on the road full time, pretty much, driving a vehicle, and that's their primary reason for being. I suppose when we're talking about people that they're driving on business, but that's not their main role. They're actually a salesperson, or they're a consultant or whatever. They don't see themselves as a professional driver. They see driving as a means to being able to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is selling something, or meeting with customers, managing relationships, whatever it is. And I guess that's the challenge in so many organizations. They're not those drivers who could be doing huge business mileage. I mean, I think after lockdown, we're going to find that number of business miles probably reduces in a lot of organisations, but you know, you've got businesses out there that class 10,000 business miles a year as low mileage, when in fact that's probably sort of medium to high mileage now. It's 40 miles, 200 miles a week. You can have, there's a lot of opportunities to have an accident or an incident, or to do damage in 200 miles a week.
Sorry, just on that, Ollie, I think a way to address that really is if you are an organisation that operates a fleet, but you haven't got, as David said, professional drivers that their job is purely driving. I think a great way to start that is actually, before you hand keys over to anybody, is to make sure you have a really decent induction programme specifically on driving. That will then get people and your new employees focused on, okay, driving is important. This company takes it seriously. I've been on a fantastic induction program. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm driving this vehicle right. I'm doing the daily checks. I'm not being an idiot on the road. An induction program is really crucial, I think, in really embedding any new employees that are going to be driving for you with that road risk strategy or that driver training program that you've got in place.
Absolutely. As Dave said in his presentation, it's the acknowledgement as driving as an at-work activity. Is, and for most commercial sort of van driver, for example, they're either a plumber, a builder, a sparky, or whatever they are, and actually driving is a means to an end. They don't actually start work until they arrive on site or the customer's house and then start work. That journey is they don't see it as a business activity, and as a business activity, it's a risk and has to be managed.
Something that we found that worked really well at Thames was we actually included in the PDRs for drivers that drove on work was actually, we had a look at your accident stats over the past 12 months. We took a look at your telematics and we included it in that discussion, in that one-to-one that you had with your line manager in your PDRs. It was included in some drivers' objectives. It actually makes it a lot more conscious for the driver then, actually, okay, this is part of my role. It's not just about how many pipes that I fix or how many jobs that I do. I'm actually going to be reviewed and measured on my driving over the past 12 months. And that really brought it forward in the driver's mind. Actually, driving is part of my job. It's not just, like Stuart said, a means to an end.
Yeah, definitely. Lucy Hughes has commented, in fact, they promote, sorry, Lucy, I don't know what organisation you're at. Otherwise, I would give you a shout. But Lucy says that we promote the same professional identity with our field service engineers. Great example there of drivers probably doing relatively high business mileage, but in a field engineer role. She says that if we praise them for simply being safe, it's not as motivating, but professional to them sounds a lot more impressive. I think we can all agree that that's a nice approach to take. So we've had a question in from Sarah Johnson. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you're enjoying the discussion. Sarah says, what do the panel believe is the most effective risk management tool to help change driver behaviour? She says here to be coupled with education, but I guess it could be education. But what do you do? What do you put in place first to identify what education is needed? Stuart, what do you think?
So for me, telematics can be a contentious issue. For me, it's the only absolute way of understanding truly what happens out on the road. It helps cut through that myth and legend of the driver's version of the event. And it's not to say that the driver's always wrong, but actually it's just having that level of information, a granular detail where you can understand how they drive, where they drive, how far they're driven, why, and actually those harsh events. Truly to understand, one, the extent of the scope and how they compare to their peer group, but also factors you can be very specific then in challenging certain behaviours. Whereas actually, we've seen examples of, you'd have a call from a member of the public complaining about one of the drivers. It's very difficult to have a factual conversation with one side, not in the room, but actually to try and explain what happened. Whereas telematics is you can align all the data together. And so telematics in itself isn't the answer, but actually doing something with the data that is produced is.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Emma, on telematics? Tricky subject. I mean, it tends to work, it tends to be commonplace in commercial vehicle fleets, less so in passenger car fleets. I think, a lot of fleet operators would agree that they probably don't do as much with the data as they would like to.
That was going to be my point is, yes, telematics are great, and I completely agree with everything Stuart has said. You know, it's really crucial if, you know, to have that granular data and to really understand what's going on. But telematics, you get so much data out of it. And organisations, you know, will install telematics because they know it's the right thing to do. But a lot of organisations will be using it for kind of track and trace only. They're not actually using the data to look at the driving behaviour and the risk that a driver poses. And I think that's a lot to do with resources in a fleet team potentially. There is so much data you can get from telematics, but the risk is if you have telematics in and you're not looking at that data and something happens, you potentially are liable. If you've got data at your fingertips that you haven't looked at or worked on, and there's an issue with the driver and something terrible happens, you know, you are at risk as an organisation. So telematics is really crucial, but you really do need to be looking at it. And I know that there are organisations out there that offer that service for you, just to make it a lot more easier for you to actually understand the data that your telematics is giving you.
Yeah, I find it a slightly perverse world where actually is, you know, you're better protected by not knowing, or perceived as not knowing. So so therefore, why would you invest knowing that, you know, you've got a problem that you don't necessarily want to advertise? But if you want to manage it, you know, you have to measure it. So it's one of those ones. Absolutely, what Emma says is, if you do it knowingly, do it with eyes wide open. Accept it for what it is. You know, your fleet, you know, when you first day and you switch it on, you get the results. Your fleet will surprise you as to truly what happens. But from that point, you can do something about it. You know, break it up into manageable elements that you want to deal with. Pick out your worst offenders, and you know, characterize your worst behaviours that you want to eradicate.
Address
and
first,
and then use nudges to get the drivers to adopt and moderate their behaviour over time. And it does take time.
It is a journey, and you know, you won't be able to do everything at once within 12 months. You know, it really is a journey, but you know, just pick something that's really easy to tackle first, do that, complete that, and just move on. You know, road risk is a mountain. I think, you know, it can be ever never ending, but you know, it is worth it. And you know, the financial savings as well from managing risk and looking at telematics data, you know, it really will be worth it.
So let's, conscious of time, we've got more questions coming in. I'm going to go from one controversial subject, telematics, to another, grey fleet. What is grey fleet? I think we can all agree that grey fleet, so vehicles, private vehicles being used for business, is going to increase inevitably. I mean, it's been that shift away from cars. Company cars into grey fleet has been growing for a number of years now, and I think through the crisis this year, I think we'll find that will probably accelerate the decision making process in some businesses. Daniel McKeown asks a really good question here. So Daniel, welcome, by the way. I hope you're enjoying it. Good to have you involved. Daniel asks, do you think that driver training, daily vehicle checks, and or driver training and daily vehicle checks, etc. So, you know, we know what else he's referring to there, is relevant to grey fleet or occasional pool car drivers. I knew we were going to get some really emphatic nodding. Look at them. I mean, I know, you know, duty of care obligations are the same regardless of whether it's a company car or a private car. Who wants to go first?
I'll start if you don't mind. So the principle I always work of, ownership of the asset is irrelevant. So it doesn't matter whose name's on the V5. If it's been used for network activity, it's the same risk and has to be managed accordingly. By letting drivers use their own vehicles, you can while they're out on the road.
Oh, Stuart's freezing.
Sorry, probably my broadband.
That's okay. Emma,
yeah.
Great.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just going to completely echo that. You know, it's got nothing to do with who owns that vehicle. If it's being used in work purposes, as an organisation, you have a duty of care responsibility to make sure that it's roadworthy. You are not automatically exonerated from that responsibility just because your employee owns the vehicle and not you. You know, I'm not going to teach you all to suck eggs because you're obviously all invested in this, but you need to make sure that any vehicle that drives on business for you is taxed, MOT'd, has the right business use insurance, and also as well, you know, that the driver is adequately licensed to drive. So even the basics as license checks, you still need to be doing for any employee that drives their own vehicle on business. There's a bit of a misunderstanding, one could say. You need to really make sure that you know what is a business journey and what isn't a business journey, because you'd be surprised at how many journeys are actually business, and you are responsible to make sure that that vehicle is suitable and that driver is licensed. There can be some education needed in our industry on that. But yes, you definitely, you need to treat that vehicle as you would any other on your fleet.
Emma, if someone's just doing a couple of miles to do the mail run every morning, is that a business journey? That's a business journey.
Yes, it is. Yeah, even things like that. So, for example, I always use the anecdote. If you ask one of your employees to go to the supermarket at lunchtime to get some cakes because it's somebody's birthday, that unfortunately is still a work journey. You're actually better off getting somebody to use a pool vehicle or someone who's got a company car to go, rather than somebody that's going to be using their own business. Because if an accident happens, that is a work journey, and you are subject to the legislation and the requirements of any vehicle that might have been owned by you on that fleet.
Yeah, okay. I think we've probably said all there is to say about grey fleet for now, but clearly an important topic to probably for most fleets, certainly most car fleets. Obviously, I think that's going to become sort of increasingly prominent. So let's move on.
Ollie, so just on that, with everything that's going on at the moment and the reduction of mileage and everything else as well, I think we are in a very pivotal stage where organisations will be looking to reduce costs and removing company car benefit because business miles are down. Is just be mindful of that risk, because you're just pushing it from one place to another. It's company vehicle, we know how to manage those, and we have the controls in place. And we're in a danger of setting a dangerous precedent where we set a significant growth in the grey fleet just to maximise the savings opportunity. It's very risky.
Don't forget your obligations. Don't forget about your responsibilities, because a lot of them haven't changed.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, a lot of organisations at the moment, they might have a small grey fleet, and because it's so small, that might not be actively being managed. But if that increase is going to happen, you might have in policy certain requirements and restrictions. For example, the vehicle can't be over 10 years of age. But if that policy is written, you need to be enforcing it. It's all fair and well having it written in your fleet policy that you've got these, great restrictions and regulations for anybody that has a cash allowance. But you need to make sure that you're capturing that information and enforcing it as well, that policy.
Yeah, certainly the early signs from us at Drive Tech within the sales team, we've been having some really interesting conversations with big fleet customers recently about their growing grey fleet and the steps that they want to take to mitigate risk there. So I think it seems that by and large the majority of fleet operators realise that they've got some fairly significant responsibilities and are looking for ways to to deal with those in the right way. So we've had more questions, lots of questions from Lucy. Lucy's from Grundfos. So welcome to Lucy and anyone else from Grundfos that's joining us. We've also had a question, we're probably back in your territory, Dave, from Simon Gardner here with PCV and LGV, so big vehicles, bus, coach and lorry. With them having driver assistance technology, are drivers relying too much on these new technologies rather than using their own judgment? Are they sort of falling into autopilot kind of mode?
Well, I think for bus drivers and coach drivers in particular, autopilot is a big concern anyway, regardless of the technologies on their vehicles. You do a route day in, day out, you become familiar with it to a point where you switch off to it. So technology in vehicles, it's evolving, but we have to bring drivers along with that message. So it could be that we haven't trained the drivers properly on the technology in the first place. Yeah, and we got to sell benefits to drivers. For me, technology, well, in the commercial world, is growing at a pace. And for me, yet again, it's bringing that driver along the journey with you.
Yeah. I had a question. If I may fire in a question quickly, because this is the sort of thing I think that might be on people's minds. So what are your thoughts on how evolving technologies or evolving vehicle technologies like electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles how do we see those affecting driver behaviour, the way people are driving on the roads? What sort of challenges are sort of fleet managers and road risk managers going to face with, you know, electric vehicles are kind of one stage, on autonomous vehicles are a completely different step into the future. So what are your thoughts on those? Emma?
I think we're still quite a way away from that kind of fully autonomous vehicle. There's still a lot that needs to be done. We are on that way. I mean, the driver assistance systems that you have on cars now is kind of our halfway step. And I think drivers are going to be brought along on that journey anyway, because, you know, you get a new car now and you've got lane assist and all of this kind of fantastic technology. I'll be honest and say I'm not sure how autonomous vehicles are going to affect, you know, our industry and how drivers are going to be driving. I think there's still a lot of reluctance and reticence, and I think people are quite uncomfortable about the thought of autonomous vehicles. And I'll be honest and say I don't know enough really to say how this might impact UK roads. But I think there's still a long way to go. And I don't think at the moment, if you are a road risk manager or a fleet manager, I'm not sure whether it's the biggest thing that should be on your radar now. Electric vehicles, yes, if you're on that transition to electrification, fantastic. So you should be. But autonomous vehicles, keep it at arm's length, I'd say. Have a read, but I'm not sure whether it's something you should be considering too much at this present time. Anyone else? If anyone else disagrees with me, please feel free.
I think you're right. And I suppose until every single vehicle is autonomous and every single vehicle can see every other vehicle, it won't work truly effectively. So your vehicle may be in full autonomy and you're sat back kind of watching the world go around you. It's not going to stop a lunatic in a 1972 Beetle appear from nowhere that the car just doesn't see. So I think it's an emerging technology. I love the bits that are around now, the lane assist and all the emergency autonomy braking. So the vehicle is taking control if it thinks you haven't seen something. But again, these are educational things that the driver need to be aware of, because I've had feedback where perhaps the handover wasn't as effective as it could be, and the first time they experience that the vehicle doing what it should do, they think something's wrong.
Yeah.
Bit like when ABS came in the first time round, they jump on the brakes, and all of a sudden it starts pumping back and feeding back, and they lift off the brake thinking something's wrong. So these are things that drivers got to get used to, and we will see an influx of new technology, all safety related, all for the all right reasons, but absolutely the driver engagement piece is critical.
I think what you said, Stuart, about handover is really important. I think there's a lot to be done for vehicle handovers, and I think there's a lot of improvement that leasing companies and people that do those vehicle handovers, I think they need to step up. From my own personal experience, vehicle handovers can be quite quick and not particularly helpful for drivers. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space, especially with all these new cars, electric vehicles, new technology. Those need to be better.
Yeah, I agree, and I've been guilty of in the past as well. Somebody could go, "You're out of this? Yeah, I have one before. It's fine." So you actually, as a driver, make the most of the opportunity for that induction, because you will learn something.
Yeah, guys, I'm very conscious of time. I'm going to try and wrap this up with an all-encompassing question. We've had some brilliant questions from our audience today. Another good point made by Paul Farley there. Who says that there are business vehicles being seized daily by police that are being driven without business cover, and it can have a wider impact on companies who may also be prosecuted for using a vehicle without insurance. So transport managers, hopefully you know this. So a final question to both of you. What is the key to implementing a really effective, I know this is a broad question, but I think this kind of sums it up. What's the key to implementing a really effective driver risk program within a business? Emma, what are your thoughts?
For me, it's engagement and communication. You can have the biggest budget in the world for a driver risk training program, but unless you engage and communicate with your drivers, it won't be effective. It's all about culture for me. In order to get better drivers, you really need to bring them on board with your journey and really engage them in driver safety and road risk, which is where that engagement and communication piece starts. So that for me is really important, is engagement and communication with drivers and bring them along on that journey with you.
Culture is key.
And for me, I agree. All I would add is it has to be personal. So it has to be relevant to the individual, because if you try sheep dipping everybody with the same level of interaction and same level of education, it doesn't work. So it has to be something that the driver can recognise in themselves as something they can do to improve. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Excellent, thank you. Right, we're pretty much at time, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Firstly, I mean, I can't believe the hour's gone so quickly. We could have used longer. I think we could have spent a lot more time on this. Firstly, I'd like to thank our panel very much. Stuart, it's been a pleasure having you, and we hope you'll join us again for another webinar coming in the very near future. Emma, thank you also. Insightful and informative as always from you. And Dave Wales, thank you very much to you for your presentation. I'd like to thank our audience as well. It's been fantastic having you on board with us today. So many familiar names there. Thank you for tuning in. We've recorded the webinar. We're going to share it. So we'll be sending this out in due course. Please onward share it to anybody else who you think might benefit from what we've been presenting and talking about here today. We'd obviously like to thank Project Edward, and we hope that for those of you that are involved in other Project Edward related activities this week, that goes really well for you. You know, within our industry, this is it's a really powerful message. You know, so please get behind that. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Please follow us on LinkedIn, and you'll also find us on Twitter and other social media. And as a salesperson, it would be remiss of me not to say that if you like the look of Dave's Driver's Mate modules, they are just one of a number of micro-teach sort of bite-sized learning products that we're developing at Drive Tech. I think the whole sort of training and e-learning world is moving into a more little and often type approach, and we are developing lots of training interventions and educational materials that that can be delivered in just a few minutes on a regular basis. So if you'd like more information about any of our Drive Tech products and services, please don't hesitate to contact either Emma or myself. It would be a pleasure to hear from you. We've got lots to say. And I think on that note, we're going to say goodbye to you all. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and we look forward to hearing from you all again very soon. Watch out for another Drive Tech webinar coming in the near future. All the best from myself and our panel. Thank you and goodbye.